The applause was a physical force, a wave of sound that threatened to knock me off my feet. I stood on the stage, the heavy, gold-plated award in my hand, feeling like a stolen artifact. 1,000 smiling faces looked up at me, their eyes filled with admiration. They were looking at Eleanor Vance, the celebrated author, the voice of a generation. But I knew the truth. They were looking at a ghost, a well-dressed lie, and my only thought, the one screaming behind my polite smile, was tonight. Tonight is the night they find out. My secret was simple. I was a fraud, a thief of words. Every book I had written, every character I had created, felt like a lucky guess, an accident. I wasn't a genius. I was just a good mimic. I had learned the right words to say, the right emotions to describe, but none of it felt like it truly belonged to me. My success was a house of cards, and I lived in constant, paralyzing fear of the one breath that would bring it all crashing down. That night, I had just won the Starlight Prize, the highest honor in my genre. I gave a speech I barely remember, something about inspiration and hard work, words that felt like sawdust in my mouth. Afterwards, at the reception, I was surrounded. People wanted to shake my hand, to tell me how my books had changed their lives. Each compliment was another brick in the wall of my terror. With every word of praise, the voice in my head grew louder. They don't know, but they will. Someone will ask the right question, see the flicker of panic in my eyes, and expose me for the imposter I am. I was trying to escape, to find a quiet corner, when a young man blocked my path. He couldn't have been more than 17. He wasn't smiling like the others. His eyes were serious, intense, and he was clutching a worn, dog-eared copy of my first novel, The Echo Chamber. This was it, the moment of reckoning. He looked like the kind of reader who saw everything. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I have a question." My heart hammered against my ribs. I prepared my defenses, the vague, intellectual-sounding answers I had practiced for years. "Of course," I managed to say. He didn't ask about my inspiration. He didn't ask about the symbolism or the themes. He looked me straight in the eye and said something that froze the blood in my veins. "Your main character, Catherine," he began, "she achieves everything she ever wanted. She's praised by everyone, but inside, she's convinced that she's fooled them all, and that any minute she'll be exposed as a fraud. My question is, how did you know?" Time stopped. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of the crowd, it all faded away. This wasn't a question about my book. This was a question about me. He had seen it. He had found the one thread of truth I had accidentally woven into my web of lies, and he was pulling on it. This was the end of the line. I opened my mouth to give a practiced answer about character development, but no words came out. I just stared at him, my mind a blank, roaring panic. He didn't flinch. He just held my gaze, waiting. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. Then he did something unexpected. He broke eye contact and looked down at the battered book in his hands. "You know," he said softly, "everyone talks about your beautiful prose, your complex plots, but for me, the most real thing you've ever written is Catherine's doubt, her fear." He held the book out to me. "I'm sorry, this is weird, but I brought this for you. Could you read the passage on page 214, the one I marked?" I took the book. My hands were trembling. What was this? A trap? Was he going to publicly shame me with my own words? I looked at him, confused. He just gave a small, nervous nod, and then, before I could say anything, he turned and disappeared back into the crowd. I stood there, my world tilted on its axis. The heavy gold award in one hand, the light, worn-out book in the other. I fled the party. The taxi ride home was a blur. My mind raced. What was on page 214? What was his game? Was he a critic? A student journalist who had figured me out? I burst into my apartment, tossing the award on a chair as if it were contaminated. I locked the door, my heart still pounding, and with trembling fingers, I opened the book to the marked page. It was a passage I knew well. It was the scene where Catherine, after receiving a major award, is alone in her hotel room, convinced that it was all a mistake, that she is nothing but an empty shell. It was the most honest, painful, and personal scene I had ever written, the one I was sure everyone skipped over. But that wasn't what made me gasp. It was what was in the margins. The page was filled with tiny, handwritten notes. Next to the line, "She was a ghost in her own life," he had written, "This is me." Next to, "Every compliment felt like a countdown to her exposure," he had written, "I feel this every single day at school." And then, at the bottom of the page, a final devastating note was circled. "Thank you for putting my secret into words. It makes me feel less alone." I sank to the floor, the book clutched to my chest, and for the first time in years, I cried. But not from fear, from relief, a tidal wave of it. He wasn't there to expose me. He was there to thank me. He hadn't seen a fraud. He had seen himself. And in that moment, sitting on my apartment floor, the whole world rearranged itself. My greatest, most shameful secret, the feeling of being an imposter, wasn't my weakness. It was my gift. It was the source. It was the one authentic thing about me that allowed me to write words that connected with a quiet, serious boy I had never met. I wasn't a fraud who was pretending to be a writer. I was a person who felt like a fraud, and my writing was the only way I knew how to talk about it. My success wasn't an accident. It was the result of translating a universal, unspoken human fear into a story. I wasn't fooling anyone. I was connecting with everyone who shared my secret. The fear didn't magically vanish that night. The voice is still there sometimes. But now I know what it is. It's not the voice of truth exposing me. It's the voice of my muse. It's the whisper that reminds me what it feels like to be human. And it reminds me of the boy with the worn-out book who wasn't looking for a perfect author, but for a fellow human being. What if the one thing you are most afraid people discovering about you isn't your greatest weakness? What if it's your most powerful, most authentic, most human gift? Thank you for your time.